So it all starts at the first mile. If you don't get inventory from your vendors, your last mile doesn't have a fighting chance.
Yeah.
So the first mile of the supply chain is all that supplier collaboration, forecasting with your vendors, discussion of what is needed, when is needed, and getting those commitments and items from vendors to your facility or distribution center, or maybe it's a drop shipment to your end customer.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. If you're a seasonal CPG business, you may have grown due to word of mouth to this point in your growth, primarily through B2C channels, while B2C has its nuances for planning and procurement due to the unpredictable consumer demand. The drivers and consequences are not as severe as B2B once you have landed a few large enterprise customers. Also, if you want to have fast growth, you will need to sell through marketplaces and large retailers. While onboarding them could provide sustained growth of 2 to 3 times without much marketing efforts, meeting their delivery and fulfillment expectations is hard, and you need much superior control of both the first and last mile to serve these key customers and avoid losing after you have landed them. In today's episode, our guest, Colby Young, shares his insights on the nuances of PO Lifecycle and why it is critical for seasonal businesses such as cosmetics. He also discusses the role of the first and last mile and why the first mile planning and collaboration are as critical as the last mile to ensure timely delivery of goods to key customers, avoid inventory stockouts, and missed opportunities due to disconnected systems. Finally, he discussed the planning and supply chain challenges associated with onboarding enterprise customers and how to avoid disruptions caused by sudden growth spikes. Let me introduce Colby to you. Colby Young spent 5 years in financial consulting before getting his MBA at the McCombs School of Business at UT Austin, where he focused his studies on corporate growth and supply chain. He has spent the last 6 years supporting manufacturing, distribution, and retail companies to scale their business, implementing and adopting best-in-class technologies to supplement their ERP for more efficient and effective supply chain processes. With that, let's get to the conversation.
Hey Colby, welcome to the show.
We're really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Sam.
And I am super excited to have you as well. The kind of work that you are doing in the supply chain and procurement, it's definitely cutting edge. So it's going to be so fascinating for our listeners. Just to kick things off, Colby, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus?
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, it's been interesting kind of how I've gotten to where I am today and my past work experience and education. I started off, spent about 5 years in financial and strategic consulting, where I worked a lot with companies and banks, looking at risk analysis, cost benefit analysis. And it really allowed me to look through the lens of where to place bets and maybe more importantly, where not to place bets from a financial perspective. And it was really, really great experience. But I also found out for myself, I didn't want to stay in industry. It was all about dollars and cents. I really wanted to get into solving real world operational problems. So that actually led me to get my MBA. I went to business school at McCombs School of Business here in Austin, Texas. And one reason I made that decision, I wanted to get into the technology space, really starting to see how technology was able to solve these big real world problems that I was looking at just through the financial lens. And when I was in business school, I found I was most attracted and excited about the classes and case studies that were not, I'll call quote unquote, the sexy problems, but the ones that really were big worldwide global problems that needed to be solved, that were causing big global issues, for business and the world. And that really led me to supply chain procurement specifically, and leads to my focus today, where I've spent the last 6 years working with manufacturing, distribution, retail companies, diagnosing their supply chain and working with them on where do we place technology bets to get the biggest bang for their buck, and really navigate the supply chain disruption that we're all dealing with right now.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, technology investments can be perceived as making bets, but if you do it right, obviously you are going to have a lot of benefits out of it. So we are going to dig into all of that, especially in the supply chain area, right? That's going to be super exciting for both of us. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions that we ask every single guest, Colby, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So this is, I've thought about this a lot recently. And, my experience over the last 6 years have been kind of rolling up my sleeves, like I said, helping diagnose supply chain issues, specifically with growth.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of the thing that has made me most excited about what I do, is when you help an organization scale by implementing the right technologies, placing those right bets. So it's interesting when you think about the world we live in today.
Yeah.
We're in the data and information era, right?
Yeah.
We can get anything we want, any information, any data on our phone with a click of a button. And that's amazing, right? It's really amazing in this technology, digital world we live in. And the ability for companies to get global marketing, digital marketing out, the ability for a product to get visibility across the world as easy it is to your next door neighbor. Even just this concept of going viral, right? That was not a concept 10 years ago, 15 years ago. The ability that in a day, a week, a month, a product can go from nothing to everyone around the world wants it, and they want it with a click of a button from their phone, right? We're in this world of I know I want, when I want it, how I want it, which allows for massive growth. It allows for a company, if done right, sales can skyrocket. You have omni-channel presence. You have e-commerce, right? You have so much investment in technology and operations on sales growth. And we should, right? Any executive listening to this, right, is we need to grow sales. We got to hit sales projections. If you're venture-backed, private equity-backed, you've got to. However, that same amazing phenomenon is causing a huge supply chain disruption in an imbalance between demand and supply. You have this demand that can skyrocket overnight, go viral. The supply side has nothing to sustain a viral growth. So we have this massive imbalance, right, that we've got to figure out. And that's what I've been focusing on a lot from my education and into the last 6 years working at SourceDay is making sure that we are focusing on the first mile of the supply chain and giving the tools and technology and digitization that the last mile has, right? Of sales growth and e-commerce and omnichannel to have a fighting chance to keep up, right? And I'm not saying like there'll ever be the resources there to stay directly on track. But we've got to be better on the first mile to make sure that this imbalance is leveled out a little bit.
Okay, amazing. Some great insights there. So before we get into your story, and obviously the story is going to be super exciting and we all are going to so much enjoy that story. But before we do that, I want one clarification of the terms that you mentioned. And I don't know if everybody is going to be familiar with these terms. So I think a lot of people sort of know what last mile is, but I don't know if they are going to be able to compare the difference between your first mile and last mile. So do you want to describe maybe what a first mile and last mile is?
Yeah, absolutely. And great clarification there, Sam. So last mile is thought a lot about, right, is that final sale, the final delivery of product to the end customer, which is crucial, right? For an organization, that last mile is how you book revenue, right? got to get the sale, you've got to deliver product, and you really can't book that revenue from that CFO landscape until that product is delivered. And from that executive landscape, you're holding inventory, you have carrying costs until that product is delivered. So the last mile has had a huge focus because that's revenue and bookings, and so that's that final delivery. The first mile is on the complete opposite side of getting that inventory from your vendors. So it all starts at the first mile, right? If you don't get inventory from your vendors, your last mile doesn't have a fighting chance, right? So the first mile of the supply chain is all that supplier collaboration, forecasting with your vendors, discussion of what is needed, when is needed, and getting those commitments and items from vendors to your facility or distribution center, or maybe it's a drop shipment to your end customer. So that's kind of the difference of those opposite sides of the supply chain.
Okay, amazing. Great clarification there. So let's dig right into your story. And I'm super excited for the story. So do you want to provide a little bit of context, which business this is, their business model, what kind of challenges they had? I don't know whether they had challenges in first mile, last mile. So maybe, put some context there. Do you want to share that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've personally had a lot of experience over the last few years working with cosmetic brands. Since COVID has hit, the cosmetic industry has boomed. You've got people wanting to really focus on self-health and self-care. And, it's been a lot of that in the news of how important it is to take care of yourself. So a lot of these lotion and cosmetic brands have really taken off. And we're talking about, all these different omni channels and digital marketing presence. It's, now easier to do than ever. So specifically when I talk about a brand that I worked with their CFO called Winky Lux. And they're a cosmetic brand based out of New York. And they had a online presence. They were selling all through e-commerce. They had a really nice website. They were running on QuickBooks, having steady growth, great, successful company. And then they came to us when they got a flagship big box retailer contract with Target. So they were going to have their product launch in every North America Target retail store plus Target.com. So now they had in-person retail, they had their own e-commerce and Target.com e-commerce. And the projections they had was more than doubling their business in 12 months. And they came to us, super excited and freaking out a little bit. And how are we going to deliver on this? We are going to more than double our business in 12 months. How do we deal with that imbalance of the supply chain I talked about? So that was really interesting, exciting, and fun to work with the COO of Winky Lux to help him solve the issues. And it really was circled around three main problems. So the three main things that the COO came to us with is the big concerns were, one, first and foremost, was just landed this big contract with Target and making sure that business relationship was not hindered, right? That in the first 2, 3, 4 months, were they going to get dropped? Were they going to lose shelf space, right? And you have, customer satisfaction is an unquantifiable metric that every CEO needs to care about, right? And the other piece of it is the customer satisfaction, but also the brand. Like, you spend a lot of money for any brand company. There's a lot of money spent on building up that brand. And in the same way we talk about access to data to buy, well, access to data for bad reviews these days is just as powerful. So there was a customer satisfaction, delivering on promises, and brand that was a big worry. Second big worry was the systems they had in place. Was, do they have the right systems in place to have a fighting chance at more than doubling their business? The last was seasonality. So the third big issue that that CEO was concerned about was navigating the seasonality of the cosmetic industry, right? When you think about different types of shades and colors and fashion trends, it's highly seasonal. So those were the three things that I worked with the COO to diagnose and really help implement technology to place the right bets to navigate those three main concerns.
Okay, very interesting. So obviously we are going to be talking a lot about the story, but before we get there, let's touch on the seasonality. So a lot of listeners might not be familiar with how seasonality works in the cosmetics industry, and maybe they have similar problems because seasonal problems are fairly similar. They might have different dates, but the problems are similar. So do you want to touch a little bit in terms of, I know that you mentioned you have different shades and colors, and obviously we are not going to be as knowledgeable in the cosmetics and because obviously women are going to be slightly more familiar with that. What were the specific challenges? Do women use, let's say, specific shades in a specific month? And I have no idea what I'm talking right now. Do you want to touch a little bit more on that?
Happy to speak to it. And you're right. Seasonality, whether you're in the cosmetic space selling different shades of color, right, for a fall season or a summer season. Same idea with clothes, right? You have a lot of fashion brands that are making seasonal colors of t-shirts, right, and hoodies, and it's when you're buying specific items for a season is really just the idea of seasonality. And you have massive complexity when you're dealing with seasonality. And the biggest one, which goes back to any CFO cringing about inventory carrying costs, right? Holding inventory more than you need, or worst case, having to eat inventory. So the big challenge that Winky Lux dealt with, in any business executive leader that's listening to this podcast can think about, if you have a seasonality, is you have a short window to sell and deliver on any seasonal product, right? And if you don't have those goods the day that seasonality product is going to kick in, now you've lost a day to sell that inventory. And when you're selling via Target, like Winky Lux was, both the in-store or the online selling through Target.com is every day lost of delivering, whether it's on the shelf or to the warehouse for online fulfillment, is a day loss of inventory to be sold that they're going to have to eat. So that product would just be returned to them. So it is so critical in a seasonal business is to truly understand the inventory needed and exactly when it's needed and when you're going to get that goods, or else that product will truly have to be just written off or held an entire year till the next season. And that's a year of inventory carrying costs. So it is a very much added complexity when you have seasonality to truly understand when you must have this product and what does that forecast look like with your suppliers, and inventory levels at your supplier side, and do you have allocations from your suppliers to ensure that you don't miss that window where inventory will be lost.
Okay, so very interesting. So when we look at seasonality, obviously a lot of businesses are going to be familiar with seasonality. Some business may have the seasonality, some may not have. They sort of understand that, this is going to be a problem. I have been solving this on, let's say, a spreadsheet, and I have been fine. So that's why I asked, okay, I don't know if you're going to have specific examples of a product that had that really short window so that people can follow along. What kind of seasonal problems are we looking at here, and the degree of complexity of the problem as well? When we talk about simply seasonality, sometimes the problems may not be as complex in certain industries, but I know for a fact that in case of cosmetics, it's going to be far severe. So do you want to talk about any specific product or the example, and how long was the window, and were they actually getting these products back? Let's say if they were not able to sell those.
Yep, absolutely. So for the case of Winky Lux, and this kind of leads in, your question into one of the other concerns the CEO had, was the right technology in place to even have a fighting chance for this growth. So for the seasonality of Winky Lux specifically, it was a lot of shades and colors of the makeup that they were producing to sell in Target. So we're, for us, I'm in Austin, Texas. We don't have a true winter. Maybe it's still fall for us down here. Other parts of the country might have snow right now. It's full winter. But if you think about fall, right, there are specific colors associated with fall and actually makeup for Halloween that Target is only going to sell through a certain number of months leading up to fall and through fall. Once those fall months are over,
Yeah.
those products will come off the shelves. Those products will come off of their online e-commerce, target.com, and that window of opportunity to sell that inventory is gone. So specifically for shades of makeup, for Winky Lux's case through Target, thinking through the fall lens, they really had about a 3-month window, 3 to 4 month window to sell this product. And if it wasn't sold, and if they didn't have it to fulfill, they were eating it. And the worst case we all know about, any CEO, any executive, is a stockout, right? You have someone going to your website to try to buy a fall shade color, and it's not there in inventory. Well, one, you may never come back to that website to buy it. That your brand might get affected with a bad review somewhere, and that opportunity to sell, that unit of SKU is now lost, and it might be returned to you, and you're going to eat it. So the kind of flip side there is, okay, how do we even try to manage it? And Winky Lux was managing on QuickBooks and spreadsheets, and they had seasonality always. It's not like when they got released in Target, now they had seasonal. They had a seasonal business always, but it was at a scale that they were able to manage on QuickBooks and spreadsheets. But now they looked at, okay, now we have more omni channels. We're going to be on target.com. We're going to be on the shelves of Target nationwide. We've got to figure out how we better manage this. And that was another, really interesting and exciting and fulfilling story that I got to work with Winky Lux COO of helping diagnose these problems and put technology in place to give them a fighting chance to have as much reduced sunk inventory as possible.
That's very, very, very interesting. So now, obviously, we are going to be talking about technology because that's where, we are talking about, okay, I have my QuickBooks, I have my spreadsheet, and I have acquired an enterprise customer. Obviously, that's always going to be a big deal for any retailers out there. And typically, in our experience as well, these are the triggers that typically drive the technology changes or the system changes. But even in this story, so I don't know if they had any sort of enterprise customers before Target. I don't know if they targeted or not, if this was the first time they targeted this big customer. But going from, let's say, QuickBooks, and I don't know what was their e-commerce platform, because when you talk about the omni-channel experience, obviously your e-commerce platform is going to play a big role. So I don't know whether they were on Shopify, BigCommerce, so maybe you want to touch a little bit on that. And then finally, when you create the system architecture, it's going to have a lot more pieces because a couple of pieces are not going to be enough. So do you want to talk about the story? So I know the problem was, okay, I'm trying to acquire this customer, but getting from point A to point B is going to require a lot of different changes in the system strategy. So do you want to talk a little bit about how the plan for, let's say, I don't know, 30, 60, 90, 120, 1 year looked when the customer approached you?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, right, they came with a ton of excitement about this growth and a ton of fear, right, of how do we make this happen. And to your point, right, that the technology pieces that they had in place were working for what they had, right? They didn't have any big box retailers, any enterprise customers like that. It was all marketing. It was all through their website selling. They had a great marketing engine. They're based in New York, and it was working for them. So the adoption of this first big box retailer, true enterprise client to distribute their product was the forcing driver to look at the technology to how do we scale? How do we allow us to capitalize on, more than doubling our business and keeping up with it? And so from an e-commerce standpoint, I would need to look back. I believe it was Shopify. They had one of the traditional e-commerce platform integrated into their website. But the big thing that they needed to figure out was the internal. It wasn't so much the sales side. It was internal and with the supplier network. So thinking back to last mile and first mile, the last mile was Target was going to be their last mile, right? Their sale, the delivery product. They had to figure out, how do we manage the first mile to make sure we can deliver on that last mile and not have our customer satisfaction hindered, our brand hurt, and the relationship with Target, right? This was this was their big opportunity, right? They were in the big leagues now, and they needed to up their technology. So what they were able to do, and one of the things that we talked a lot about in any technology implementation is time to value, especially when you're in a fast moving organization, being able to look at technologies you can implement and realize returns quickly. And that's hugely important in our fast changing pace that we live in right now, is being able to make technology decisions to be confident in we can get this up and running. So they did a lot of technology adoption. They actually they got off QuickBooks, they implemented a new ERP. They implemented a cloud-based ERP called NetSuite. And that allowed them to get up and running extremely quickly. And then to the first mile problem, one of their biggest concerns, and WikiLux uses contract manufacturers overseas only. So for those that might not be familiar with the contract manufacturer term, that is the idea of you create a product idea. So in this case, it's a makeup color and all the ingredients of it and all the widgets that's needed, but you outsource the actual manufacturing of that to an entity that's going to do it. And then you're buying the so that was WikiLux's business model, was all contract manufacturers. So their next biggest concern was, okay, we've got a true ERP in place to be able to manage inventory levels, to be able to forecast appropriately, to be able to look at planning and scheduling. But that gap still existed with the first mile of the supply chain of we've got to know quantities my suppliers can commit to, dates, what are my changing lead times, are there price increases? The world we live in now, when you ask for product from a supplier, whether it's a single widget, that's 10,000 widgets, the data tells us that more than half of every purchase order, so every request from a supplier will change. Over half of every purchase order will change. So if you don't know what your suppliers can commit to in that first mile, now you have no chance at setting customer expectations. You have no chance of delivering on that seasonality. And one of the biggest drivers that in their whole technology transformation was expectation setting with Target. Was, we all know in life and in business, right? If you can set proper expectations, you can have some wiggle room. It's when you set improper expectations and miss it, that's when things really burn you. So that was the big discussion when they implemented NetSuite as their ERP. And then when we looked at bridging that gap to the supplier network to truly have a communication level with their suppliers.
So very interesting. So let's focus on the vendor side of the story. Obviously, you mentioned that that's where the problems are going to be, especially as they relate to the seasonality aspect. You mentioned that, what, if your vendors are going to be late in the first mile, you are going to be missing a lot of opportunities. And then obviously you are going to have a lot of problems from the seasonality perspective. In my experience, when I look at, our customer base, typically the way they deal with this problem is they are going to have a superhero in their organization called the supply chain person or the procurement person. And what this person does, to be honest, or maybe a team of people, their job is to make calls, a lot of calls. So when there are going to be any changes in the PO, typically they manage the expectation by making the calls and by finding the secondary vendors, and they are going to have the secondary, tertiary. So in this particular case, obviously, you guys have a software that actually solved the problem. I get it. But overall, from the process perspective, what were your recommendations considering this business? When you looked at them, I don't know whether their vendors were really aligned with the results that you were seeking from your software. So in our experience, when we are working with our customers, sometimes they are going to have just one vendor. Can you believe this? They have just one vendor for a strategic reason. And the only reason why that is strategic is because they are actually trying to reduce the cost. They are trying to simplify the business model. They don't understand how badly it can fire back when you have just one vendor or supplier. So when you guys looked at their data and the processes, were you confident that they are going to have issues even after the software? Did you make any sort of recommendation in aligning the process along with the software? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Great feedback and commentary, Sam. You're absolutely right. Single source suppliers can backfire.
Yeah.
Right. You do need to be able to have multiple options, specifically in this day and age. Sometimes you are pigeonholed and only working with one if it's some specialty item.
Yeah.
So that can happen. In WinkyLuck's case, and to your point about the emails and the superhero, you're right. Procurement people, supply chain folks are superheroes.
Yeah.
The fact that in this day and age, with all the disruption and the ability for sales to skyrocket, that we get product in the door and out the door delivered is absolutely amazing. And they work very long hours.
Yeah.
They manage a ton of different communication tools. And that's the issue, is that the last mile of the supply chain has all the technology in the world. And the first mile is operating in, to be honest, sticks and stones. I mean, in the world we live in right now, email, spreadsheets, and phone calls is a sticks and stones way of managing all your inventory that's going to fulfill all of those sales orders. And in WinkyLuck's example, really, we got in there.
Yeah.
We had like 8 different communication tools.
Okay.
They worked with all overseas suppliers. They were WeChatting, Skyping, emails.
Yeah.
There would be some late night or early morning phone calls. And the issue with these disparate communication tools is that they don't speak to one another.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
They don't speak to the ERP. They don't speak to your e-commerce platform, and they don't speak to the rest of the organization. So if you're having a WeChat and someone else in your organization that needs that information isn't on it, they have no idea what's going on, right? So there's a visibility gap that exists between the ERP and the supplier network. And that visibility gap that we're talking about is the first mile that's imbalanced to keep up with the last mile, puts massive risk on the whole organization. And there's no visibility, right? It's that one superhero, right? That never gets to go on vacation, that has all the information that the rest of the organization doesn't. So what we were able to do is look at their process and recommend some process change on what I'll call a purchase order life cycle.
Okay.
How you manage the life cycle of a PO. Which, to just define this real quick, a PO gets created, whether it's QuickBooks, the ERP, wherever it gets created, until those items are received. That would be the life cycle of a PO. And lead times these days are getting longer and longer and longer, right? Having more supply chain disruption. So that life cycle is getting longer, which makes it more and more complex. And through that life cycle, there needs to be process. And the first is an acknowledgement of a purchase order, right? Did you get it? What are you committing to? And then there's steps from there. There's multiple change. There's delivery schedules. Is it going to come in multiple deliveries? Shipment information. So it's defining those steps and then implementing technology that allows the procurement team and the supplier to be in lockstep on those steps. And a big key is to allow communication to be guided. A business process that everyone should be thinking about in every aspect of the supply chain is managed by exception, right? Allowing automation to take care of what I'll call is happy path. Things are going well, happy path, right? But when things are not going well, you need to know why they're not going well. And that is when our brain power is needed to figure out the problems. And that's the risk. And that's exactly what a digitized communication platform can do for you. And we did for WinkyLuck's, was allow both buyers and suppliers to be guided through that PO lifecycle and know exactly where the risk was to, again, get the brain power working on, we need to solve these problems.
Amazing insights there. So I don't know if you actually recall the process changes that you guys made in the PO lifecycle for this specific customer. I don't know whether they were not receiving properly, whether their return process was not really managed, because when you are doing it in QuickBooks, it could be all over the place. Everybody goes by their own rules. As long as you are getting the job done, I'm happy, right? So that's how the organizations typically operate. Let's say if you have QuickBooks or a spreadsheet, but when you are systemizing the processes, you have to define the life cycle of these transactions. So do you recall if they had any specific problems in the life cycle that you had to align?
It was Wild West, Sam. I mean, you talk about, right, when you're on QuickBooks, there are no rules, right?
Exactly.
And it's right. It was Wild West. And I'll say anyone that's worked for an organization that started small and scaled, everyone was Wild West at the beginning, right? You're figuring it out. You're trying to do sales. You keep up. If it's working, it's working, right? But it's when you get to a certain maturity level. And that's the other thing that I really love about what I do, is helping diagnose a maturity level. We're never going to recommend process and technology change until you're at the right maturity level of an organization where you need it. And so for them, they were there, and that Wild West had to go. So the first thing, I mean, it was, we'd create a PO, we'd send it over to the supplier, and then we had 8 different communication tools just to know what was going on, right? A lot of times it was, a PO gets sent, and then let's cross our fingers it shows up, right? So think about, and some folks this story might ring true. We call it the nightmare scenario, is where you create a purchase order, you send it over to the supplier, they don't confirm anything, maybe you don't follow up, and a month or 2 goes by, you expect that inventory in, you call them up and say, hey, supplier, where's my inventory? They say, what are you even talking about? Right? That is a story that one of our co-founders here at Source Day, we joke about, gave him all his gray hairs. It used to keep him up at night. And that we call it the nightmare scenario, because what that does to a supply chain is absolutely devastating. So the first step that we implemented with WinkyLux was absolutely requiring every PO to be acknowledged at the line level. So a lot of times suppliers, you'll send a PO and they say, yeah, I got it, we're good. Well, every line of that purchase order has content that needs to be confirmed. So what we implemented was every line being confirmed for dates, quantity, and price. And that is what the technology was able to guide them through. Without technology, you have growing purchase orders, a million things going on. You cannot get an acknowledgement down to the line level every time and make sure that acknowledged information is back into the ERP. Because that's driving scheduling and planning. So that was the first big change that we had to work with both buyers and suppliers on. This is why this is crucial. And this is why both sides are going to be better at communication and delivery if we can have a true confirmation on what can we commit to based on what's going on. Listen, if you're having supply chain delays as a supplier, let's talk about it. Let's communicate on it. What can you deliver on? I need 1,000. Tell me you can give me 500 on this date and 500 on another date. I can plan for that. I can set proper customer expectations. And now we're navigating supply chain disruption. No technology is going to get rid of the Suez Canal debacle, the Long Beach port debacle that we see on the news. Was on 60 Minutes the other day. But what technology can do is provide the visibility and accountability to give you a fighting chance to navigate it and set expectations properly.
I completely agree. And by the way, love those details there, because that is really setting the perspective here for our listeners as well. So I want to touch on one of the points that you mentioned, which was related to acknowledgement. Now, when you look at the acknowledgement, when you are talking about communication problems between 2 parties, the acknowledgement could mean a lot of different things. The customers who actually come from the ERP world, they might be thinking, you know what, I sort of have an ERP that sort of does a lot of different things. So what am I doing here with respect to communication? So from the acknowledgement perspective, what was this acknowledgement about? Was it at the PO creation time that vendor has confirmed that they are going to deliver? How was the process integrated with the vendor's ERP system? Because the vendor might have their own system, you might have your own system. So talk to us a little bit more about the communication. How is the communication happening at each stage of PO lifecycle?
Great question. So first of all, in any technology implementation, right, change management is paramount, right? You've got to have all the users on board and understanding the value. And it's not just a top-down push of, hey, this is what we're doing, get on board, but truly explaining the why, right? Why are we implementing this technology? So getting the WinkyLux procurement team on board, collaborating with the suppliers as to this is why this is going to make your life so much better as a supplier, make you communicate better, to have you provide your client with more proper customer expectations and proactive communication. That's what it's all about. So from the acknowledgement standpoint, that's it, PO creation, right? The idea is that every purchase order that you create as an organization must get confirmed. If it does not get confirmed by your supplier in some SLA, service level agreement of we need an acknowledgement in 24 hours, 48 hours, 1 week, whatever makes sense for your organization's supply chain, that needs to be discussed between you and your supplier, and giving them technology to be able to do that in an efficient way. Because you're right, they have their own systems, right? They've got to go look at their own forecasting and their own supply chain to be able to communicate back. So giving them an easier way to do that allows them to be better, right? Allows them to give you that expectation. And the big thing about the acknowledgement, and I think we're staying on this topic for a bit, is until your purchase orders are confirmed by your supplier at the line level, your entire supply chain is at risk. Every sales order, every production line, if you're a true manufacturer, for WinkyLux's example, they were buying finished goods to fulfill all their different omni channels. All of that was at risk if they did not know in their ERP that what they ordered from their supplier can be committed to. And that's a scary thing for any executive, for anyone in supply chain to know what we ordered. I don't know if we can commit to that. And my systems don't know if we can commit to that. Okay. And then we can, if we want to continue through the PO lifecycle and talk about the other touch points of where that comes in. And I mentioned, half of every PO is going to change, right? So navigating that change, and that's just a binary. Will it change or not? But how many times is it going to change?
Exactly.
If you have a 6-month lead time item, it might change a dozen times. And if you don't, right? And that's real, right? And if you don't manage that change continuously with your vendors and get that change updates into the ERP, you're flying blind with, again, setting customer expectations, what's your planning, what's your scheduling. Anyone that utilizes a planning engine, right, it's looking at that open PO data. So after the acknowledgement, there's now another step. Let's reconfirm communication at windows prior to shipment or delivery. Let's make sure we are looking at this data again to make sure we're on the same page. And if we're not, what are the changes? Because changes are going to happen. We know. You just need to collaborate on each and get the change and get it back into the ERP. And doing that manually with email spreadsheets and phone calls and manual data entry works for a stagnant organization. Anyone growing, it is not going to work. It's going to become a bottleneck to your growth, or you just throw administrative heads at a problem that in the digital transformation age we live in, there is technology to help you with this.
Okay, amazing details there again. And I am going to put a little bit more perspective there so that listeners are able to follow along in terms of the order of operations. So in the typical standard ERP PO life cycle, you are going to have PO, then you are going to have a receipt if you have received the goods. But here you are talking about, I don't know if the acknowledgement, and what does acknowledgement mean in this specific case, and what does confirmation mean in this specific case? Is it the confirmation of, okay, you have sent me a PO and I am the vendor, so I am actually confirming that I have received and I am committing it to deliver, right? And then you mentioned that, that may change at any point of time. So after some time, what you are going to do is right before your delivery, you are going to ping them again that, are you still committed to this? Or if you are not, okay, what are the changes? Is that how the order of operations are working, or am I missing anything here?
No, you nailed it. The acknowledgement is the first step, and you nailed it right. When you think about just ERP, it's PO creation and PO receipt.
Yeah.
That's the life cycle of a PO.
Yeah.
That is not the true life cycle of a PO, right?
Yep.
There's potentially dozens of steps in between that's trying to be bridged with email, spreadsheets, and phone calls. So you're right. The acknowledgement is that very first step. That PO is created. I need to know what my supplier can commit to that I've sent to them, and at the line level and all the details of it, right? Every PO line has a date, a quantity, and a price. And those three things must be confirmed right when I create the PO. And then, so that's your acknowledgement. And then, like you said, later on in the life cycle, prior to shipment, we need to reconfirm. And maybe for an overseas supplier, that's 30 days before shipment. Maybe it's a supplier that's 4 states over. Maybe it's just a few days. And then there's advanced shipping notice information, which we haven't even talked about. How is it being shipped, right? In what container? How many boxes? What tracking, right? So that's another step of purchase order life cycle that you're getting. And then you might have packing slips that need to be delivered. Another big one that comes a lot from international suppliers, custom documents need to be provided. You have quality compliance documents that need to be provided prior to shipment, right? So these are all examples of steps of a purchase order life cycle that have to be managed. And if you don't have a system to handle that process, totally flying blind. And the ERP, to your point, does not have that granular of a PO lifecycle process. It's let's create it and let's receive it, right? And if you don't extend the purchase order lifecycle to the vendor in a digitized process, you're going to have misses. You're putting your sales at risk. You're putting your customers at risk. And for a brand company like Winky Lux, their actual brand at risk.
Okay, amazing. So that's it for today, Colby. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts or remarks for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'll just, leave you with is every supply chain is forefront of everyone's mind right now, right? It's in the news. It's being discussed everywhere. I think prior to COVID, when I got into really diagnosing and working in supply chains, it was thought more as tactical, right? We did a lot of education to really try to get it. This is strategic. The first mile of your supply chain is strategic. It is not tactical. Since COVID has hit, it's really brought to light what we've been preaching for years and years and years of this is strategic. So I would just partake on any executive listening, any board member listening, that you really have to shift your mindset of your supplier network, the relationships you have with your suppliers, having primary and secondary and tertiary suppliers. This is a strategic part of your business and not tactical anymore. And if you keep going down that this is just, we create a PO and we receive goods as tactical and not strategic, your scale will become a bottleneck at that first mile. And implementing technology to bridge the gap between your ERP and your supplier network is in my point of view, one of the most important things you can do for your supply chain and the relationships with your vendors.
Okay, amazing. And my personal takeaway from the conversation is going to be you are lucky to have a superhero in your procurement department and the supply chain right now, but you are not going to be able to find the second superhero. And if you are the superhero, you are probably the bottleneck for the company. So streamline your processes, go easy on yourself. And by the way, go easy on your superhero as well, because it's not fair to them to ask them to work for 24/7 and put your brand and company at risk. On that note, Colby, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a fascinating episode.
Hey, thank you for having me, Sam. It was a pleasure and really appreciate it.
Of course.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Colby, head over to sourceday.com. It's sourceday.com. Also, if interested in speaking directly with Colby about his experience and how he can help your company scale and navigate supply chain challenges, he can be reached at colby.young. It's colby.young@sourceday.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Edmund Zagorin, who describes why the cost of spend is an important metric for some of the strategic sourcing categories. Also, the interview with Matt Keys, who describes the importance of supplier intelligence and how that helps uncover supply risks before it's too late. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.